There's a place I have found in the shade on the ground, far from all worries and troubling sound. When I go there to be by myself, only me, no one can guess what I came there to see. There's a sun in the sky, there's a cloud drifting by, all kinds of birds make you wish you could fly. And in the distance I see someone waving at me. I hope that it's you, but who else could it be?
And it's Monday morning. Good morning. Well, it's morning still here. I suppose on the East Coast we're getting into the noon hour, but want to welcome everybody for joining us. It's our third episode of our new show here on Untold Radio Network called Coffee Time. We kind of every week we're going to feature a new one of our hosts from the network. Talk a little bit about what happened last week on the network, some of the different shows, what we've got coming up this week. We'll talk about current events a little bit, some stuff going on, share our thoughts on it, and we'll get to know that guest that we feature that week a little bit more than maybe you currently know them. I mean, this is going to be a fun episode because I really do like our guest today is Jason McLean. He hosts some shows over on Texas Front Porch, and he is also the host with Dr. Dean Bertram here on the Untold Radio Network of Mysterious Libraries, which is such a great show. I mean, they cover so many different areas of literature throughout the paranormal spectrum that it's like you never know what you're going to get, and I love that flexibility of how they do that show. So let's bring Jason in. Hey, Jason, how are you?
Good morning, Jeff. How are you doing, man?
I am hanging in there. How are you?
Very much the same. I'm definitely needing more caffeine, though. I'm going to say this morning has not been conducive for calm vibes. It's a 3-shot, espresso kind of day.
I hear you. That's when we really kind of started brainstorming this out, when me and Doug were talking about, we should do a show that just is kind of a more casual approach to everything, that just kind of recaps what went on the week prior on the network. We've got so many different shows here now, so many different areas of that, the paranormal room. There's a lot of different corners to go stand in. And it would be interesting to do a show that kind of recaps that, talks about what's coming up this week, but also a chance to really get to know the different hosts on the network,
Right.
And, you've been doing, when we started the network, with Dr. Russ Jones and Brad with Wide Open Research.
Yeah.
Russ Jones has been a guest on a multitude of channels across YouTube. He's a great author, great researcher. But when he comes on as a host, I think a lot of people, I'm interested in having him and Brad on here in the next few weeks, because I think it's somebody that you hear them talk about their research and their ideas a lot, but what was your favorite subject in high school? What kind of car do you drive? Do you really feel like So this is going to be cool as people get an opportunity to really get to know the different hosts of the network. So.
Oh no, I love this show. I love the concept, and you have, I think, the best opening of any of the shows on Untold for this one. I'm sorry, I love that opening song. And the fact that you've got Bigfoot like floating in space and going on underwater. It's the best opening of anything we've got on the channel. So I really appreciate the show. And I love what you're doing here. To your point, it's getting to know us better, right? Because, it's easy to get sort of locked into, with the show that you're working on. and then people are like, well, what is this person really like, right? So I love this, something a little more relaxed and like, hey, what's going on? What you got?
Yeah, and what another thing that kind of makes it interesting is that all these shows are uniquely different. I mean,
Hmm.
it
Yes.
isn't 7 or 8 paranormal shows that go anywhere. I mean, my show kind of approaches the subject of
Hmm.
Bigfoot from the flesh and blood standpoint, but
Okay.
yet I have discussions all the time about that this is a creature that may or may not have supernatural capability. I don't know. My personal research hasn't
Hmm.
shown me that yet, but I'm always willing to have the discussions
Oh
with
yeah.
people what they be capable of. I'm certainly not closed-minded to that. But
Hmm.
then, and I think Russ Jones's show with Wide Open Research is kind of similar to that. The very nuts against show, kind of the flagship show, called Untold Radio, and they'll go anywhere. You never know who they're going to have as a guest. I
Yeah.
mean, they've had
Exactly.
the guy who was the photographer for the Rolling Stones for 4 decades one time came on
Hmm.
and was telling stories about Mick Jagger 30 years ago. I mean,
Yes.
it's just crazy how that show could kind of go anywhere. But the
Hmm.
one thing I really liked about your and Dr. Dean Bertram's show, Mysterious Libraries, is the first week you guys launched on the network, the book you were covering was about the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at it and thought, hey, other than what you learn as a kid in school, which is not a
Hmm.
whole lot of accurate details, I kind of felt like, but I watched it and I I was
Hmm.
really enthralled with that book and your
Yeah.
guys' discussion on it and the approach you guys took to talking about it. And I realized I don't think it would matter what book you featured. I'd enjoy listening to that show. So,
Yeah, well, and
um,
that's sort of the point, right? It's there's so much out there, and there's so much written about subjects that maybe we think we're familiar with, but we really aren't, right? You hear a particular perspective, you get it one, and you're not too heavily into it, so you don't realize what you don't actually know yet. And so we try and find, yes, books that have been around for a while. We are trying to find, there are new books and newer authors, but we want to get to maybe some stuff that people aren't aware of that have been around for a while, right?
yeah,
And investigate some of these things a little further, but then also, we're going while we're reviewing the books or the documentaries. We do documentaries and articles and all kinds of things. We want to, give our opinion about them and say, well, are there strengths or weaknesses, on that one, right? Specifically, Ken's book. Again, Ken's a personal friend, not a name drop, but we took him to task on a few points that we thought he could have shorn up a little bit, right? And
yeah,
that's we want to call balls and strikes the way we see them, but we also want to get the broadest possible view of all of this
sure.
phenomena from all of these different authors, because maybe we don't agree with an author on something. That's fine, but they should be heard. You need to know this is a part of it, right? I mean, some
Absolutely.
so many people, I think, when you mention, hey, what about the Schaefer mysteries, right? No one's got a clue in the modern, in a lot of the modern ufology movement. They don't know what the Schaefer mysteries were, you know,
Mhm.
and that's an important piece to this whole puzzle. People know about the Biddy and Barney Hill story that's presented, but what about the other things associated with it? The cultural impacts, these, again, being able to go back and the cultural impact of Godzilla and his evolution and thought. These are they seem kind of disconnected, but they aren't ultimately. In a lot of ways, I'm very much I have a very holistic viewpoint. I think a lot of this phenomena, how we perceive the phenomena, is much more interconnected culturally than we realize, and we need to investigate that and be open, and so we can see the overlaps, right? It's like, hey, if there's an overlap here, maybe that overlap is important. What does that tell us about the phenomena?
Yeah.
But also, what does it tell us about ourselves?
Well, one of the things I really appreciate listening to you talk about these things, Jason, and I'm not here to And you know, but it's the fact that whether or not those discussions start taking on different focal points, whether they're religious, whether they're historical, you are so well spoken and just your knowledge of that. I mean, when I hear you speak about religion and different religions, you know, and talk about those types of references, you're not out of your depth. You are very knowledgeable on a lot of different areas of these discussions. So,
Well, I appreciate that. It is definitely, though, the byproduct of a misspent youth is all I can say.
yeah.
It's like most people,
Well,
they're misspent youth out stealing cars, doing drugs.
yeah.
And it's like, what did you do? I watched way too much Discovery Channel and read way too many things.
Yeah.
As a kid. Like that's my misspent youth. But yeah, a lot of this is just the end result of a lot of just I'm the kind of person who doesn't like being told what to think or believe. So it's like, okay, well, let me go see what's out there, right? What actually exists? What are people actually saying about it? Because the problem is, and this really was driven home for me when I wrote my last book. There's a difference, and this is specifically about the Fortean phenomena, Bigfoot specifically in North Texas, but it just realized it's sort of everything. There's a difference between what people say is seen versus what people actually see, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
applies to almost any part of your life. There are things that you were told about what other people have seen or encountered or think, and then you actually encounter the thing, or you talk to the person who saw it or have had a thought, and you realize this is not the same thing, right? And that's an important distinction. I think so much of our time, and again, this is all spectrum of your life. So much of our time is spent arguing with or arguing over, competing with or competing against thoughts and ideologies and concepts that are given to us. They're figments of someone else's
Yeah.
imagination. Instead of saying, well, what does this person actually believe? Let me go talk to them. And you tend to find out, oh, hold on, this is not what I thought it was. Because there's this figment that we're all fighting over instead of saying, well, what's the reality of it? Again, maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong. But I'm never going to understand that if I'm over here fighting this figment that's been presented to me. So,
sure, because that figment, it can originate from a lot of different sources. The one source it didn't originate from is right here in your head, and yet it's trying to be planted there. So, your ability to be, I guess, approaching it from a standpoint that I agree with. I kind of see the similarity in my youth and yours in that I don't want to say that I had an authoritative problem with authority, but yet when somebody said, well, this is the way this is, or this is how this works, I always approached it from this, silent voice in my head saying, are you sure? How do we know that? Is there a different possibility,
right.
But yeah, and one of the things that you were mentioning about the books that you guys talk about, I think that is, you touched on something there that, there's a lot of maybe iconic books that are out there in a lot of different areas of the paranormal discussion. But if I went and Googled the 50 most well-known paranormal books or 50 must-reads for paranormal literature, versus if I Googled paranormal books that you haven't read.
Yeah.
The list of 22 paranormal books that you haven't read, but you should, is way more interesting to me than the 50 iconic books that everybody seems to keep referencing. I mean, there is a lot of stuff out there that is really interesting. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, maybe some books that you feel are must reads that people should be taking a look at. But let me pull up so first thing we're going to do is go through. Now, I'll tell you what, this was the busiest week on Untold Radio yet.
Yes.
It is crazy how many
it has
shows were going on. Several of the channels were doing multiple shows last week. And we'll just start on Sunday. I'm gonna start with yesterday and go backwards. So Sunday, Wide Open Research, Russ and Brad had Bo Bruns on. That was an interesting show. And on Bigfoot Influencers, Tim and Dana had Bob Strain on, who is part of the North American Wood Conservatory. Dr. Dean was on Talking Weird, talking about the Midwest Weird Fest that's going on in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Yep, that's his baby, yeah.
And I'll tell you what, after watching that show, I was like, man, where do I sign up? I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Oh, I hate that I can't go this year. It's like I want to,
it's coming up soon.
I want to go.
But if people want to get, some of the details on that, who's there, what's the conference about, what do they feature there, I would encourage you to go watch his show. That was on the 25th. So that was Saturday. Down South Anomalies had Beyond Sasquatch Paranormal Activity on their show. And Down South Anomaly, they basically cover, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, kind of those southern areas that we don't hear talked about a lot on a lot of the shows. So that was kind of interesting. We had the premiere of a new channel that has joined the network, Sasquatch Outpost. And that was on the 24th. That was an interesting show. I think their guest wasn't able to get on because of technical difficulties. So they took the opportunity on that show for us to get to know the host. And for anybody who's not familiar with Sasquatch Outpost, I would encourage you to watch it because it is really, it's not just a show in the format. The host is very interesting. Kind of looks over a museum of Bigfoot stuff that is really well known, and a lot of people have visited. So,
it's a great museum. It's on my bucket list, to be honest.
Yeah, it is mine too now. And Down South Anomalies on the 23rd had Karen Mutton on. Dr. Dean on Talking Weird had, and I may ruin this name. You're probably familiar with this person. I'm not. Noria Hayakawa?
I honestly couldn't tell you.
I don't know who that is, but Dr. Dean had her on.
No, it's like I helped him upload the stuff because his connection where he is terrible. I love I'm like, I don't even know how to say this name. I'm not as familiar with the work, so I still haven't had a chance to actually watch the episode. My weekend was way busier than I thought it was going to be. I'm looking forward to it though.
On the 23rd, Dr. Russ Jones and Brad over on Wide Open Research had Daryl Collier on. On the 22nd, Wednesday night, it was really an interesting show. Doug and Alex on Untold Radio had the Paranormal Rangers on. They are a couple guys who for decades they've worked in law enforcement on the Navajo reservation, which was 24,000 square miles. I mean, it's huge. It was a fairly large law enforcement agency. But when they started a few decades ago, really getting these influxes of paranormal type calls, whether they were Sasquatch related, whether they were seeing lights, things like this, they dedicated these two guys on behalf of the Navajo law enforcement to look into these things. And, if I'm being honest, I kind of thought that we were going to see two people who maybe are a little more optimistic about what they're seeing, maybe quick to throw an analysis on what it is. But no, these guys, when you hear them talk about some of the individual calls that they looked at, they were very skeptical. they approached it from a very realistic law enforcement standpoint, and it is amazing some of the stuff that's up with. So I'd encourage everybody to check that out. That was on Wednesday night, the 22nd. On the 21st, you and Dr. Dean on Mysterious Libraries had the Michael Heiser Remembered show.
Yes. Yeah, that was.
Tell me a little bit about that.
That was hard. So Michael Heiser was a Semiticist. He passed sadly on Monday. He had announced actually a few months ago, last year, that he had a stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and then just a few weeks ago, he's like, "Guys, this is it. Like, we're done. Like, there's nothing left. So I'm gonna spend some time with my family," and he passed on Monday. Heiser is a very, very influential and important. It's hard to call him a theologian because he's not really a theologian, but he is. He was a Semiticist, meaning his specialty was the languages and cultures of the Near East and Middle East, particularly from an archaeological perspective, right? Ugaritic, Akkadian, the languages and the cultures around the Levant. And his main thing, he has this phrase I love. He says, "I want to get people unafraid of the Bible." And so a lot of his work was on saying, "Hey, here's the context that you miss. Here's a lot of the cultural understandings of the time that influence and shape the text itself that we often miss." Right.
And I think that is often missed. The cultural, we look at it as words on a page and reading it in, 2023. We're not looking at the cultural context of when it was wrote.
Yep. He also, one of the things he said that I think was great, and it encapsulates something I've thought for a long time, but he said it better, which is the Bible was written for us, but not to us. And that's a big context, because we think, okay, well, we look at it from with our mindset, our worldview, and that wasn't their worldview. And so it's getting back into that idea of saying, well, what would the original authors thinking? What were the original audience thinking? What would they have seen? What were those connections? Right. And again, his work is amazing, and he will be sadly missed.
Yeah. I agree. You guys did a phenomenal job of not only remembering him, but really, holding in reverence a lot of the things that he talked about, and a lot of the points that he made. So, then also on my show the night before, on the Monday night, I had Chuck Morgan on from Howling Underdog Films, and we talked a little bit about a documentary that he's got coming up late this summer into the fall. Probably be released in 5 or 6 parts in like 20-25 minute segments each time, like a week apart. So it'll be like a series that'll run for a month. And then Sasquatch Outpost came back, and they had that was the original show. That was the original show. They launched that original show that I said they didn't have they had a guest scheduled, but I think they were having some technical difficulties getting the guest on. But just so people know, Sasquatch Outpost, it isn't like somebody who's never done a show before and we said, come here and do a show. He's been doing this for a while. He's very good at it. Love his laid back style. And I think a lot of people will appreciate that approach. It's certainly different than the way I or Russ Jones approach the Bigfoot subject. He's a cowboy. He's very laid back, very laid back approach, and very casual interview style. But that's what we had last week. What do you guys got coming up this week?
Hold on, I had to double check because it is a weird name, but I'm really looking forward to it. Hold on, I just had it up, and of course it went away on my phone. It's the Conspiratologist. There it is, the Conspiratologist, and I'm looking forward to it. It's a very, very short documentary, but against a guy who studies conspiracies. So really kind of looking into it, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
That will be interesting. I mean, he's not just nailed to one section of conspiracy. He probably
Yeah.
studies a lot of different conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I actually I have to watch it today. So I'm gonna, like, after the show, when I go back to work, I'm gonna have it on so I can listen to it in the background. I really am looking forward to it because, again, I want to see his perspective, how he's coming at this, because I think in a lot of this and a lot of what we've done on the show is say, hey, there's a history to some of this stuff that maybe you're not aware of. Again, context, right? To material
Sure.
that maybe you're familiar with, but you're missing some context that needs to be part of the math that you're doing.
I would agree with that. It reminds me of the saying Noah was a conspiracy theorist until it rained. You know,
Exactly.
once it
Yeah.
started raining, he really wasn't that out there
Mhm.
anymore, was he?
Yep. And there's a comment that can be made, but I won't, given the YouTube overlords.
So, one thing we normally do on the show is talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening on the radar in culture and news.
Mhm.
And I typically, probably to throw this out accurately would be to say that I'm not a stranger to the conspiracy thing. Okay, I'm a full-blown prepper who believes that the future currency is likely going to be bourbon, bullets, and antibiotics. Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, but you know, I look at some of the stuff on the news, and I don't want to push it in a political direction
Yep.
or something like that. And trust me, if we did, I'd probably have us banned from YouTube, the whole damn network. So I mean, I don't want to do that.
I had my personal channel taken down just a few weeks ago because of that, and I'm like, hold on. And yeah, I got it back pretty quick, but it's like, yeah, trust me, if you have a particular perspective, they are not happy to have you on.
Yeah. But then again, I don't just want to follow if you were just to say, hey, look, let's pay attention to what's happening in paranormal
Yes.
news this week. That's being talked about on a lot of different channels.
yeah.
So I'm really trying to find some of these topics that I find interesting, but you're probably not going to see a lot on mainstream media. And
Yep.
so one of them, and I have heard a couple of people in different chats reference this, but
Mhm.
have you heard about this incredibly intelligent Canadian super piece threatened to spread to the U.S. and wreak havoc on native
Yeah.
species? So this is
Yes.
interesting because, I think a lot of people are familiar with where you're at down in Texas,
Oh yeah.
Texas, Oklahoma. These
Mhm.
hogs are a problem. I mean, they destroy a lot of
Yes.
area. The good thing about it is in the U.S., our understanding of controlling populations by harvest
Mhm.
is not a foreign deal to us. So, I mean, we go down and we
Yep.
shoot a lot of them.
As
But
much as we
if
can.
you had a group, I was going to say, if you had, let's say, a group of 25 hogs tearing up a field and you go out and you shoot 21 of them and think you put a dent in them, give them
You
6
haven't.
months and there's 25 of them back out, probably 50.
Yeah.
So it's a problem. They're very invasive, biggest invasive mammal doing damage to croplands and other wildlife. But you typically don't think of them once you get up into these cold climates.
Mhm. Well, they've started
And
building igloos. Like it's the person who wrote the article, or at least the headline, because usually people who don't write the articles don't write the headlines.
yeah,
It's kind of clear they don't really know anything about hogs because they are really, really smart. They're
yeah,
clever. Is like super. It's like they're not super intelligent. They're just hogs, but they've started
yeah,
building igloos. Like that's the weirdest thing. You're like, wait, they're building what? It's like, yeah, because they figured it out because they don't like to be cold like everybody else.
yeah. So
Uh-huh.
they talk about how it kind of got introduced into Canada, and it's
Mhm.
really not different than how it got introduced in all these other areas. But During the 1980s, Canadian farmers began breeding wild boars with their domesticated swine to create larger pigs
Mm-hmm.
that produced more meat. Over the years,
Yep.
some of the animals escaped from captivity, and when the market demand for their meat slowed, many of the remaining hogs were set free. The farmers didn't think they would survive these bitter cold winters up in Canada, but they were horribly mistaken. These boars' descendants have continued to multiply, and their numbers have exploded in the last 5 to 6 years.
Yep.
And they've kind of developed the term super pigs because they're weighing around 600 pounds. Now,
Yeah.
I often talk about this in the Sasquatch area of the conversation, in that, you know, people talk about why are so many depictions and encounters and of Sasquatch in these way northern regions where
Mm-hmm.
it's very cold, involve, they're taller, they're bigger, there's more body mass to them,
Yep.
versus your typical male Sasquatch described in Florida or Louisiana. You know,
Or
it's
Texas. Yeah.
it takes a lot more anabolic burn and caloric intake to
Mm-hmm.
survive 30 below zero, 40-mile-an-hour winds up in Canada for
Yep.
5 months a year. And we see that in existing species. You look at
Oh yeah.
a white-tailed deer, male 7-year-old, fully
Yep.
mature white-tailed deer in Alabama, and a white-tailed deer up in Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
It's 40% bigger body
Well,
mass, you know.
And that's exactly where I was going to go. And it's not just that. We tend to think of them as different species, and I guess technically they are, but there's a reason why caribou and moose are massive. And
Oh
then you
yeah,
have the
oh
and you
yeah,
have the white-tailed deer here and again, where I live, you're more likely to see white-tailed deer. You go further south, white-tailed deer, but if you go north and east, where it does get or north and west, it gets a little bit more cold from time to time. You do see things like mule deer, right? There's several ways of dealing with heat and cold. This is again, why are jackrabbits so long, lanky, with very long ears? It's to dissipate heat, right? That's
yeah,
one
yeah,
way of surviving in heat, is you get very long, very thin, very, very lanky, so that heat gets dissipated.
yeah,
The second, but one of the ways of dealing with cold is just getting much bigger, much more robust. The largest, this is true for water, for aquatic animals too. The largest whales on the planet go the deepest, and where it's the coldest. They live in
yeah,
colder waters. There's a reason the moose is as big as it is. There's a reason grizzly bears and polar bears are as large as they are. Again, you find that further up north because that's how you survive. And the thing is, certain parts of cold also produces more food, right? Down here, when it gets 105, 108, 110 degrees fairly regularly for long periods of time, a lot of the plant life goes dormant. So again, surviving on a smaller caloric intake is a necessity. Whereas up north, you need all that food that's available. So yeah, I mean, these things getting big. Again, I've seen a 600-pound wild boar. I have seen evidence of where these things have picked up whole trees that had fallen down, right down around
yeah,
Richland Chambers Lake. It literally just picked up this tree that had fallen so you can get at the grubs underneath. Feral hogs are not to be trifled with. Most people just don't,
no,
again, because their experience isn't with these creatures. They underestimate them. They don't understand what they are or how they work. But yeah, this is a real problem.
yeah. You know, when you look at apex predators, I mean, when we talk
Mhm.
about, when a lot of times you hear this in the Sasquatch conversation, is what's the biggest apex predator that a Sasquatch would have to deal with in the southern U.S. versus the northern U.S. Is two different things.
Yep.
Northern U.S. and up into Canada is probably a pack of wolves. You get
Yeah.
anything that's, you know, averages 180 to 200 pounds and roams in a pack of 15, 20 animals. I
Yeah.
don't care if you're
Hmm.
9 foot tall and 1,200 pounds. That is a problem.
It is.
If they all come after you, that is a problem. But when you start looking at these 600-pound hogs and the tusks that they have, how
Oh
sharp
yeah.
they are, they're saying that, people were looking at these populations in Canada, and I think this is what those farmers thought when they let them go. They won't outlast the wolves. The wolves will tear these things apart, and they didn't.
No.
The 20 wolves versus 20 of these hogs, it didn't favor the wolves anymore.
Nope. It never did. And that's the thing. Again, I think a lot of the assumptions was, okay, they can't survive this cold. They're not going to survive the cold. And again, it's a lack of imagination in a lot of this part. Humans suffer from a lack of imagination in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to nature, what's the Jurassic Park quote? Life finds a way.
Yeah.
You take some of these creatures that are, you take them from one place, you put them in another. You're like, well, they can't possibly survive. It's so radically different from where they lived. These things are designed to survive.
Yeah. And, your average wolf at 180, even 200 pounds, and these things are 600 pounds. I mean, if you can think of full combat between one-on-one, it would not be pretty. I mean, it would be a very violent encounter. And it's not one. I think there's a lot of natural apex dispositions that are respected, meaning I think that when a pack of wolves sees a grizzly bear, a brown bear, that they kind of look at each other and say, I'm going to go this way, you go that way. Neither of us end up well in this. And they just kind of respect that, right? There really isn't a lot of accounts of a pack of wolves really attacking a healthy, full-grown grizzly bear. But I think the natural disposition between hogs and wolves is going to be one where there isn't much respect applied. I think that the wolves look at them as a food source, and the hogs, through their defense mechanisms, are going to do what they have to do to survive, and they seem to be doing very well.
Yes, they are.
But so one of the other things I thought would be interesting to talk about, I find this really enthralling, is have you read about this at all? Or
I heard something about it. I just did not get a chance to look into it.
So in 1854, this ship, it had 37 people on board, and they were traveling one of the roughest, most inclement areas of Lake Michigan, heading to an army outpost. So this ship was loaded with gold coins to pay the soldiers at that outpost, and it was loaded with hundreds of cases of whiskey. And this thing sunk. From what I understand, there was only like 17 survivors that were rescued, but 20 of them weren't. Now, this thing has been looked for. This ship has been looked for forever. I mean, people have been trying to find this boat. And it was found by a gentleman who is a good diver. He was kind of going out in his small boat, looking on all of his electronics, trying to find a display of what he had. This thing gridded down to where he thought there was only about 4 square miles where this boat would be based on all the accounts, and found it sitting almost 200 foot deep. And they have been diving on this, and they found, I guess it's carrying 280 barrels of whiskey.
Oh, wow.
And the amount of gold on it is a couple $1 million worth of gold. So since this guy found it, he has filed paperwork with the state of Michigan saying, I should have a right to this. And this has been going back and forth, but it sounds like they've come to this agreement that that's likely true. He has to fill out a bunch of different permits, in which he's doing now. But despite all the money and gold on it, there's a lot of people who have looked at the money involved in this and said the whiskey on board is worth more.
Yeah.
That the 280 barrels of whiskey if it is still intact, which they believe it is it's worth more. And I guess one of the reasons is the grain, the corn that they used to make whiskey back in 1854 had a completely different flavor than the corn that we grow now. I mean, it was quite a bit different. And so they've got all these huge distilleries that are all lined up ready to try to buy this reserve of whiskey from this. So
that's
it'll be interesting
hilarious.
to see how that pans out. They said it could be almost 10 years before this thing's actually to a point through courts to where somebody could actually buy the stuff. But it will be interesting to see where it ends up. It would be. Yeah, that's going to be fascinating. And this was something that I thought you might find interesting just because this is a 500-year-old medicine horn found in South Africa. And the thing is it was filled with medicinal herbs that weren't that nobody's familiar with. And they talk about how these herbs survived. They wrapped them in a poisonous leaf of some sort that submitted something that didn't make the medicinal contents poisonous, but it preserved them from the outside in. This thing was found by hikers, a family of hikers, abandoned in a cave. And the cave had drawings on the wall of different things that they believe, whatever this holds, can actually treat. Like maybe this was a cave where this person who was a medicinal person could have lived. But they talk about the two different tribes of people in that area, and they think that this is somebody from one of those two tribes. And what's really interesting about this is we've found old of tonics and herbs and things that were treating diseases back then in different parts of the world, but in South Africa there has not been a lot of them found that are older than a couple hundred years old. So but it shows that these people in that area 500 years ago had knowledge on how to treat different diseases, and they talk about the different things that now that they're looking at what this thing contains, that it could treat, let me find where it's wrote. It can treat high blood sugar, control cholesterol, heal infections, and treat fevers based on the plant compounds that were used to make what this thing contained. And what this had was it was something from a bush called the cancer bush, and that's what they call this bush now in South Africa. But they don't really talk about if there's any hope that it could cure cancer, but
that it's actually going to do it. Well, this is one of those things where again, sort of like two perspectives. Again, this is like 500 years ago, but again, there is a massive sort of arrogance that comes with modernity, right? We look backwards and we're like, oh, the people in these primitive areas, they were stupid. They didn't understand anything. And it's like, guys, humans have been doing some pretty amazing things for a very long time.
Right? Yes.
Just because there's some uncontacted, group of people out somewhere doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means that they haven't been contacted with. Their survival is dependent on actually surviving. So there are skills, there are tricks, there's knowledge that they have to survive. We should not rule anything out. Their existence depended on knowing what was around them and utilizing it to the best of their abilities. Again, would this necessarily cure cancer? Probably not, but it may lend more knowledge. Again, I just think there's a lot of, in modernity, there's a lot of arrogance about how these things are handled. and our arrogance, I think, leads to a lot of problems, and instead of seeking out solutions.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, when you look at things like diabetes and cancer and these long-standing deals that for centuries has been
Hmm.
something that we've been dealing with as humans. It's you start realizing in the last 50 years, especially of research, that if there was a chemical, if there was a man-made way to cure this, that
Hmm.
we probably would be on it by now. It's more likely that there is a medicinal type
Yes.
herb or something that exists on this earth that could, play a role in
Hmm.
unlocking that formula.
Oh,
But
exactly.
this is researchers determined that the horn likely came from a member of one of two groups that lived in the region. The horn, the Khoi, Khoi, a pastoral herding community, and the San, just San, a group of hunter gatherers. The intricate and thoughtful wrapping of the horn may speak to its importance to whoever owned it. It's
Hmm.
very specific materials that it was wrapped in suggest to us that it was a treasured possession, and I presume any medicine would be in those times,
Hmm.
and that's
Yep.
what Radio France has put out on it. Um, he added that whoever owned the medicine container likely left it in the cave intentionally. Although we were unable to verify I'm not even going to try to say this word, of the origin of the horn and its contents, we consider it's unlikely that indigenous groups handed down the horn for more than 2 or 3 generations. So
Hmm.
when they say they believe this is 500 years old, the one thing they're not sure about is they look at the horn and can tell it was 500 years old. There was a worry that maybe this horn was 200 years old when this guy
Right.
was putting medicine in it. But they're
Yes.
saying that this would have likely have only been handed down for, 1 or 2 generations.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll
No,
be
and that's
interesting to
it's
see
gonna be
what they
interesting.
develop with that.
Yeah,
And the
I'm
last
gonna
thing I
keep
had,
an eye out on that one.
I this may be something that you've heard about because it came out. It was last week, but
Mhm.
forgotten sketches by Leonardo da Vinci suggest that he understood gravity decades before Newton. And it goes on to say in 2017, California Institute
Mhm.
of Technology professor was searching for the Codex Arudel, a collection of notes and sketches by Leonardo da Vinci dating from 1480 to 1518 for illustrations that he could share with his graduate students. And when they started going through these, they realized that what he drew in this one sketch is a clear understanding um,
Mhm.
of how Earth's gravity it works and how it affects everybody. I'm trying to figure out where they was gravity decades before. So he says, alongside engineers Chris Rowe and Flavio Noca, uh, Garib began investigating the sketches and soon realized that they were not simply drawings of geometric shapes, but evidence that Da Vinci had started to decode the laws of gravity decades before Isaac Newton, quote,
Mhm.
discovered them. But I thought that was interesting because, that's
Yeah.
something that typically everybody just says, well, Newton's your guy. But
Well, it's like anything else,
it
right?
makes you realize how many minds that were out there that were
Yeah.
capable of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anything, right? Any discovery, any whether it's math or technology, it doesn't matter, right? There are other people working on these problems. In fact, what tends to happen is that, and yeah, I don't want to go too often into the philosophy of it, but it seems like once the technology is able to be produced, it is produced by numerous people at the same time. Usually
Yeah.
it's whoever manages to popularize it or can define it the best, who can crystallize it the best, or in modern times make it to the patent office, is who gets the credit. It's not that Newton didn't, it's not, again, the problem is if you're 500 years ago, and you discover the secret to KFC's chicken recipe, but then you write it down, but you don't share it with anyone, it's going to be Colonel Sanders who gets the credit, right?
Sure.
And that's sort of the thing. It's not like Newton was necessarily ripping off Da Vinci, but I think the point here is that, again, Da Vinci was doing and studying other things, and he was starting to see things. And I think partly because that was the time frame, right? We were getting into that time frame where we could see that kind of thing. But that just typically is how humans advance. We get to that point where it's like, okay, now we're ready for this technology or math or science or whatever to develop, and then multiple people develop it at the same time, and then we all move on. That just seems to be how it is.
Yeah, it does. Was going to ask about just looking at a couple of the comments here from the folks in here. So we've got a lot of folks watching live. I appreciate everybody showing up this morning. One of the things I like to do, Jason, is take an opportunity for people to get to know you a little bit better. And those who tuned in last week kind of saw this with when we had Brian King Sharp on. But wanted to ask you a few questions that I'm kind of curious about. What are the 3 most listened to songs on your playlist right now?
Right now. That's, so here's the thing. My listening preferences goes very much by mood. And so I don't know that I necessarily have 1 or 2 or even 3 songs that are the most played. I will say this. I was listening to Goodbye Yellow Brick Road last night. I specifically sought that out. But I have a weird taste in music from time to time. I do like cover songs. Like there's this resurgence of cover songs on YouTube right now. There's a group called Halocene does a great job of covering a lot of stuff. Again, some more heavy metal, but they can be a lot of fun as a group. And I have this strange perverse love of translated Japanese anime theme songs. They are they are like, it's weird, but the thing is, like, they actually still write theme songs to their shows, and sometimes they're really good. They're just it's just good music. You're like, oh, I remember that time when we had theme songs, like, again, the Cheers theme song. It's a good song. Just listen to the song. It's a good, decent song. So I will rotate through. Again, I do love classical. And particularly if I'm working on artwork or whatever, then I'll be listening to that a lot. But yeah, like I said, I like the classics, Elton John, AC/DC. But yeah, there's a lot of good people working right now in the cover area, and that gives you a little bit more variety, right? Because it's not just their one song; they're covering, whole genres, so they can give it a little different twist or turn that's usually really interesting.
I think that's one thing that I probably for most people who aren't really musicians themselves or like connoisseurs of music. One of the things that they've realized with the shows that came out, like America's Got Talent and things like that, The Voice, is the ability for these artists to take a song that's possibly decades old and recreate it, or they slow it down and they own it. They make it their own in their own interpretation of it. And a lot of times you start hearing these and think, man, I like that better than I like the original.
Yeah. You know? Well, best example of that of all time is Johnny Cash's version of Hurt.
Absolutely.
By Nine Inch Nails.
Yeah.
Everyone in the world says it is Johnny Cash's song. And I was like, yes, Trent Reznor wrote it. But what he did with that song, Johnny Cash, what he did with that song is he made it his own. Second, I think probably right there with it is All Along the Watchtower, which is probably my favorite song of all time.
Sure.
Right. That was written by Bob Dylan initially. And if you hear Dylan's version, you're like, this is not the same song. It isn't. right?
No.
But again, which it goes back to the, when things are ready, people show up, right? No one remembers the Dylan version at all.
No.
And it's probably one
No.
of my favorite songs of all time. I think what I just forgot his name. I can see his face. The guy who redid it. Oh my gosh. He did he wrote and sang American Woman. I can see him. Anyway, I'm terrible with names, and it's gonna pop up. Hendrix, thank you, Kevin. Jimi Hendrix, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's like I view that because it is a religious song. It's actually inspired by Isaiah. That's what Dylan was working with. But what Hendrix brought to it, I think, makes it an almost it's almost a religious sort of feeling. Like you either understand the song and you get it or you don't. I can't tell you what it is about the song that makes it so impactful. You just feel it or you don't. So yeah,
And I think that's why my play. One thing that my playlist and your playlist probably share in common is that it'd be hard for other people to listen to it, just because I like so many different genres. And I'll have I've got a mowing playlist. I'll listen for 2 hours while I'm out riding my lawnmower, right?
Yep.
And it'll go everywhere. I mean, 1 or 2 songs, and then you're like, whoa, what's this doing here? Right?
Yeah.
It just flows everywhere through these genres of music I like. But yeah, no, that's interesting. I find that a lot of people who are creatives and who are very open-minded, which we tend to see in our communities, are people that are usually not nailed to one genre of music. They aren't just say, well, I only like country or I only like classic rock. Typically, they like a lot of different stuff. And so let's see, what else was I going to ask you? Oh, do you collect anything?
Well, so I used to collect comics, and I still technically do. It's just my life has gotten really complicated. So I've got a stack of comics I still haven't even read. Plus the fact that the comic industry the mainstream comic industry has just collapsed. Like it is producing nothing but crap. The indie comics is really where it's at. So really that's about it right now, that and ammo. It's again, life's gotten a little too busy to keep up with it. Sadly, I had to shut down my pull list just a few weeks ago because I just got too much going on. But so again, probably comics. Outside of that, it's definitely ammunition.
Yeah. Well, I collect bourbon and ammunition myself. So let's see here. Who's the smartest person you ever met?
That's a great question because, to be honest, a lot of people. I think the problem is we see like smart as a thing, right? And the problem is it takes so many different forms. Intelligence takes a lot of different forms, and I find the most important aspect of true intelligence is being able to actually understand a thing. I'd like to say my father, because the man could rebuild an engine from scratch, using coconuts and barbed wire. But a lot of it comes down to, I think the problem is there's so many people who have so many different specialties and understandings of the world. Practicality I think that was the one thing my father impressed upon me, that I think the people who I consider to be truly intelligent are, whether I meet them or read them, is genuinely their connection to practicality. I think it's very easy for people, particularly if they have a high IQ, to get off on the theoretical, and they get so lost in it, they miss the fact that no, reality exists, kid. It's like you want to smack them upside the head. It's like, this is great that this is all happening in your head, but the world, there's a reality out here you have to contend with. And if the problem is so many people get beyond reality and what's really happening, what the world is actually like. And the problem is their ideas fail. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but if your ideas don't work in the real world, you're not smart.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, regardless of what your IQ is, if your ideas and your observations fail in the real world, then you ain't smart. You just like to impress people with BS.
Yeah. I feel the same way about my father. I think that, he was somebody that uh, used his hands for a lot of stuff, built
Mhm.
homes. Me and him built the home that I live in now together. And
Mhm.
we did everything from the plumbing to the electricity to the everything ourselves. We weren't just a
Mhm.
general contractor who subbed everything out.
Right.
It didn't go fast, but I
Yeah.
mean, he just had so much knowledge on so much different stuff.
Mhm.
But I think part of attributing when somebody says, I think my father was the smartest man I ever knew, I think a lot of that is coupled with reverence in that. I
Mhm.
look at how he got his knowledge, how he shared it, the demeanor in which he
Yeah.
did so, the understanding. I mean, it wasn't just a smart person, it was really reverence for how he chose to use that
Mhm.
knowledge and how he shared it.
Yeah.
But totally agree with you on the fact that a guy can know an awful lot of, a ton
Yes.
about one thing. And is he the smartest guy? I mean, all that coin is in one bank there. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So,
And can you
um,
use that coin where you at where you're at? Like I think that's the other
yeah,
thing is someone can have millions upon trillions of Zimbabwean dollars, but you can't spend it, right?
yeah, yeah. So one of the questions I had asked Brian was, what movie could you quote by heart?
Mystery Science Theater 3000. The movie that they did, I love that movie
I
more.
love that movie too.
Um, Again, probably close second would be the original Ninja Turtles movie. Um, the new the okay, both versions of Dune. Um, I love Dune. I really, really do. And the new one's so good. It's again, the book, I kind of suffered through the book. I'm not a big fan. I'm a Heinlein fan where he got to the point real fast about everything. He didn't bore you with a lot of extraneous details, so I was never a big Herbert fan, but I do love Dune.
Yeah,
But yeah, definitely the one I could just it's Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie. I
sure.
love that movie.
Tristan asks in chat, what is Jason's favorite Godzilla film?
Oh, the original one. The in Japanese version of the first Godzilla film, that in 1985. I love
It's
Godzilla
hard to beat.
1985.
It's hard to beat that.
Mhm. It
I
is.
agree. Um, so Dr. Dean Bertram was having a conversation on your
Mhm.
show here the other night where he asked, what's your favorite B movie, paranormal B movie? And
Yes.
I'm not sure if, because then people started subsectioning that. And are we talking
Mhm.
sci-fi? Or are we talking whatever?
Right.
But
Mhm.
what are one or two of your favorite, B movies, so to
B
speak, from
movies.
the
Because that sort of opens up your field a little bit. Okay, on the Sasquatch side, I have to say it's the one done by Bobcat Goldthwait. Uh oh, what is it? Just Willow Creek. That's it. Willow Creek
okay?
is for my money is it's not just a B movie. It is the best Sasquatch movie put out there. You never even see the creature. It's if you particularly if you know your stuff because he's actually a Sasquatch enthusiast. If you know your lore, everything is there. It really is. It's a masterpiece. Um, I think after that, see, here's the thing. I don't know if it's really a B movie. What I will say is, okay, so it's not a movie, it's a television series, but it was very, very low budget at the time because they just didn't have any. It's Babylon 5, hands down, the show. The first season's a little rough. You kind of have to get through it, but once you get into season 2 and everything's set up for you, it is the best television show on ever broadcast, in my opinion.
Sure.
Season 5 you can skip out on, or you can skip to last episode of season 5 and you'll be fine.
I kind of feel that way about I see a lot of new series that I binge watch on
Yeah,
Netflix and stuff where it starts out as like the first 6 seasons. Well, The Walking Dead is a good example.
yeah,
I love The Walking Dead through season 6, season 7, and then it's like, what the hell's going on here? It's not even the
yeah.
same
I
show,
bowed out, I
right?
think, after season 3 because I read the
Yeah.
comics, so I knew once they get to the first season when they're in the prison, I was out after that. But again, I read the comics, so
Yeah.
yeah.
What's your favorite interview you've ever done on any of the different podcasts and streams that you do? Who is your favorite interview?
That's a good question.
And I know that's putting you on the spot because you've interviewed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And when I was coming up with that question earlier, I thought about it and I thought, even for me, I've probably interviewed 80 different people over the last year.
Yeah.
It's hard to come up with a favorite, but yet I could narrow it down to 3 or 4 that I really thought were above and beyond interesting. I'm just wondering if you've got interviews like that you've done that stand out like that.
I think, okay, honestly, because I've done so many good ones. So here's the worst one, or not even the worst, but what I mean is the worst part of this is I think my 2 favorite interviews are, okay, so this one's in 2 parts. It is Doug Hychek, but like the problem is a project I'm working on. I was doing some interviews, so they're not even available online. Doug Hychek is probably one of my favorite interviews. Not blowing smoke here, because there were things in both interviews that I did with him. Again, one just isn't public, may not ever become public because that project's sort of changing a little bit. That blew my mind, and because of stuff that had happened to him, things he saw. The other one, again, is one that's not public. It's with Joshua Cutchin, writer of Ecology of Souls, and Where the Footprints End. It's that man. Again, he's done a lot of hard work from an academic perspective, and so his perspective on a lot of this situation is very, very different, and it was just really intriguing to talk to him and hear some of these different perspectives on phenomena, and say, hey, what about these cultures that maybe you know about or you don't, but what are their viewpoints on it? Honestly, one of my great regrets is I didn't get a chance to interview Michael Heiser, but yeah, Joshua Cutchin and Doug Hychek are probably my 2 favorites.
Yeah. Well, I can understand the Doug one. And just so people understand, me and Jason make not 1 penny by mentioning his name on this show in that context. But I have had, especially over the last year and a half or so, 2 years, me and Doug have had a friendship where we spend hours on the phone talking about stuff, or on camera like this. Without being live, we'll just FaceTime each other or whatever. But when I was doing research, he was really helping me. I was trying to do something that was really fundamentally different than that was being done, because I didn't feel like what was being done was getting us the results we needed. Yeah. And so these conversations turned into like 2 or 3, 4-hour sessions, night after night after night, for months. And we weren't always talking about Bigfoot. I mean, we're probably only talking about Sasquatch research 1/4 of the time. A lot of it was just sharing stories and things, and what did you do today? And then that leads to an experience you had 2 years ago on a set with a producer, with Monster Quest or something like that, right? And I have come to the conclusion that the most fascinating the stories that he's ever shared with me are ones that I've been sworn to secrecy on.
Yes. So that's the thing, is I think the most interesting stuff is the stuff that doesn't get live, right?
No, it is. He has had some experiences, and I'm not talking about, he's been very upfront and transparent about a lot of things. The orbs that him and Yvette saw around their house when he was on his pontoon. She took videos of it on the phone, and he's let those go. A lot of the stuff that me and him have looked at on his 9 live cams that he's captured, that we thought, man, this is intriguing, or this doesn't seem to have a natural explanation to. He's shown it live. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that he's very open about, but there are some, you got to understand, Doug still is active in the documentaries and trying to find the right network to put him on. You certainly don't want to muddy those waters, but there's stories that he's told me about, the things that his experiences throughout the last 20 years. that I kind of feel like right now, if I had to bet on it, I don't know that I'll outlive Doug Hychek, even though he's a little older than me. But if I did, I would write a book called Never Tell You Can't Ever Tell Anybody This. I think that's what I would title the book.
Now that he knows you're writing it,
story.
now that he knows you're writing it, it's gonna. And I mean this, and not just Doug, but I mean honestly, everyone. I think some of the best stuff I've ever, the best conversations aren't public, and the problem is people can be a little bit more free to, and they're like, okay, so here's this weird thing I don't know what to do with, right? And I think again, what drives me isn't necessarily this stuff. I believe in the biblical worldview, and I think that the biblical worldview answers a lot of these questions, gives you places to put things, right? But I think the secondary to that is I want to get all the evidence on the table, and I want to get everything on the table, because I think the real reason we can't come to answers about a lot of things is because stuff is held back. Not just, us researchers, and I mean everything is just held back, right? I did a show on Siri. People asked me, we're like, hey, is there some secret library somewhere? Right? And it's like, beneath the Vatican. It's like, well, the Vatican's library is not a secret. The thing is, there is a secret library, a secret tome of knowledge that no one knows about. It's just behind a paywall, right? Some of the best scholars doing the best work, their stuff is public, but it's behind a paywall, and you have to go and buy the papers to read them. There is stuff out there that has answered a lot of questions that people don't realize they even have. The problem is it's not necessarily public. I think both as researchers and academics, people need to come together and say, okay, let's just put everything on the table so we can start piecing this together. What we're trying to do is we're trying to piece a puzzle together, but we don't have the actual picture that it is. And the problem is there's pieces being held back. How are we supposed to figure out what this puzzle looks like if people are holding back pieces?
I
right?
agree.
And that is one of my big perspectives in this
then
field.
we run into the question or the subject of why do people hold back? And unfortunately, I mean, and me and you have talked about this before, is that everybody's different. There's a lot of A-type personalities that are out there, and everybody's got different communication styles, but that ability to look at somebody else and say, I don't know that I would hang out with that guy and have a beer with him. I don't know if that's really my type of person. Does that mean I can't learn something from them?
Yeah.
Or focusing on the 90% or the 80% that I have in common with somebody rather than trying to poison them over the 10 or 20% that we don't have in common. And because that atmosphere exists in such a, everybody's opinions on different things are so passionately driven in the things that we talk about, that it's hard for a lot of people to say they think differently than I do on that subject, but I can still show them respect and let them know I appreciate them sharing it. It's like, that's something that is so difficult. And that makes people who have evidence and have helpful direction to want to put it on the table. I have seen an awful lot of videos and pictures that have been shared with me over the last few years, especially, that a lot of it I look at and say, well, I can find problems with that, or I have issues with that or concerns about that. But I have seen some video footage when it comes to Sasquatch that was shared with me that I think if it was released to the community, it would be it'd flip it on its ear.
Oh,
but they aren't going to put it out there.
That.
They aren't going to put it out there, and there's no way that they will.
And here's the thing. So I think there's a couple sides to this. I think you're right. The one problem is a lot of people don't talk, right? They don't want to talk because they have different motives and agendas, and so they don't talk. The problem is it's the stuff that's held back, because the problem is they had an experience or they encountered something or they know something, but it won't be accepted by the group that they're in, right? Each group has its own group think. And so the problem is like, well, if I say that this happened, I'm going to get kicked out of my own group, right? And I don't mean a professional group but I mean like just the group of people who've come together in a community, right? So the problem is they don't put that out there because they don't know, their worldview doesn't account for this encounter. And like you said, there's a lot of emotions and a lot of this, a lot of passion. One of the reasons I try to be dispassionate about everything is because about this entire subject is at the end of the day, I can be passionate about something and be very, very wrong. And oftentimes passion can get in the way sometimes of seeing the truth because you get so connected to a thought or an idea that you don't entertain the possibilities. That's what we see throughout history, right? Advancements are often made when a certain group of people die off, and then the new ideas can come in. I don't want to be one of those groups that has to die off for new ideas to come in. And it's not just new for the sake of new. It's just say, well, what is on the table? Because if I don't know everything and you don't know everything and you don't know everything, then let's all come together with what we do know and see if we can piece this puzzle together. So I think the problem is we have formed off into these cliques, not just in Sasquatch, but in everything. And the problem is you're so afraid of saying something that will get you kicked out of your clique that you don't bring something to the table. And that may be very important information and that would actually allow us to see what's going on. But so much of that is like, well, no, we got to sanitize this account. We can't talk about this account at all because it doesn't fit within the worldview of the clique that I'm a part of.
Yeah, I would agree. When it comes to the books, your show, Mysterious Libraries, is kind of really centered around the different literature and the paranormal subject.
Mhm.
What are some of your favorites? I mean, and I'm not just
Mhm.
throwing it into one
Yeah.
specific, like ghosts or ufology or whatever. What are
Um,
some of the ones that you found most interesting that you think people should put at the top of their reading list?
Specifically, the books are, again, Ecology of Souls. I've already sort of foreshadowed that by Joshua Cutchin. The other one is The Other Crowd. Hold on. I had it pulled up so I can remember the guy's name. But it's called The Other Crowd. You know what? Y'all can find the episode. There's only like 20 some odd episodes. But Joshua Cutchin's The Ecology of Soul, and then The Other Crowd, which is just a collection of Irish folk tales about the Fae and the fairy folk there in Ireland. Sort of more traditional stories. Again, Joshua Cutchin's The Ecology of Souls because of how he's approaching it. Again, I had my critiques of it. I was very public about it. I don't hold anything back. I had my critiques, but I think most people aren't familiar with what he's bringing to the table, and that's something that everyone needs to bring into their viewpoint, right? Those are perspectives that need to be seen. The other one, again, the stories about the fairy folk, again from The Other Crowd, um, is it's a dying genre, like these classic folk tales. The problem is everything that we have is often reprocessed through Hollywood and Disney. Even people who think they're like, oh, I'm a researcher, I'm in the field. They don't know these stories because there's no one collected them to tell you until now. So
Yeah.
it's a very intimate perspective of these stories that we just don't have. And the thing that I think is why I go these two routes is it's very easy for us to get again back to the idea of group think, right? In singular perspectives. When you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think Joshua Cutchin's perspective, and then once you see some of these stories, from some of these traditional Irish stories, you start seeing there's a lot of overlap with things that you wouldn't necessarily think are there. And you're like, well, hold on, what's happening here? Why am I seeing these connections in what are supposed to be disparate phenomena, right? So those are two. I think I think those, as far as books specifically, those are the two. I think sort of third is just sort of an overall topic, which is the history of actual ufology, but going all the way back to, again, sort of the historical predecessors. What, again, the Shaver mysteries, Blavatsky, the Atlantis, the antediluvian world writings. Like, these are perspectives that need to be part of that mixture and part of that conversation. They just aren't half the time, and they need to be there.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, I was trying to think of if I had anything. Oh, yeah, one of the books that I recently read that I think is I don't know. I guess maybe it's the genre of it that makes me so interested in it was Ghost Soldiers of Gettysburg. It was wrote by Patrick
Oh yeah, yeah.
Burke and Jack Roth. But you know, I love when literature can be looking at the paranormal perspective of something that's such a historical event, you know.
Yep.
And Gettysburg, if you look at, well, and really the whole Civil War, when you start talking about ghosts and hauntings and things like that, I find that interesting. I think that
Yes.
it's definitely a climate where something like that should probably
Yes.
exist, you know? These battlefields where so much pain and misery was
Oh yeah.
expressed on, you know, and endured that I really thought that book was interesting and kind of opened me up to want to find other books that were wrote about the Civil War that talk about spirits and ghosts because I just to me it was intriguing. But yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on this morning, Jason. We've been at it now for almost an hour and a half. So
Yeah.
I know you got a lot of stuff going on today.
Sadly, I gotta
but
go. I gotta go clock back in and make that dollar bill, y'all. So,
yeah, I hear
um,
you.
so there were some questions we just couldn't get to, unfortunately, because of the amount of time that we had in the chat. So I'm gonna quickly run through them. I love westerns. Tombstone is definitely my favorite, but I do have a fine love for the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. Yes, I saw Living Pterosaur. Done plenty of episodes on that. In fact, they count as even in my last book. And as far as conspiracies, I think there's a lot of different groups with a lot of different, again, the same in-group fighting and group think that we see in like the Bigfoot community and the paranormal community is the same with governments, religions, all of it. Just that's the problem is nobody wants everything on the table. That's the end of the story for me, is that all I want is everything on the table so we can have an actual discussion about things.
I agree. I think that's important. And Caillou did ask, you know, when he says, "Do you think there's a religious cover-up?" I've been asked that question too when it comes to cryptids and Sasquatch, and I don't. I'm a Christian. I go to church pretty much every Sunday with my family, and I still look and understand that there is a upright bipedal that I approach from a flesh and blood standpoint, the same as I would any other creature that could exist that's not discovered. I don't think there's anything that conflicts with my belief system when it comes to that. I say the same thing when I stand outside and look up at the sky at 2 a.m. I mean, when you understand the complexity of what is above us and what has been created above us, the almost vanity in thinking that we could be the only ones that God ever created able to do this or travel or communicate. And you look at how many planets that exist out there, the idea that this is the only one that's perfect or whatever. I don't know. I look at that and think it is very, very likely that that alien life exists, and I don't find any conflict with my belief system when it comes to that, to be honest with you. But
So again, unfortunately, I do have to go. So I'm going to say this very, very quickly because again, this needs to be an entire conversation. I would say the biggest problem I don't think is again anyone from the religious area covering it up is that they don't want to address these things.
yeah,
It's not that they're covering up; they just don't want to address them because they're worried about looking crazy to the mainstream. And the problem is the mainstream academia and mainstream government, they don't like these things because these things call sort of mainstream narratives into question, like traditional Darwinian evolution, right? That is a very specific viewpoint, and they've perpetuated some things. There's a lot of content out there and context and narratives that they want that all of these creatures, all this phenomena does call into question. So I don't see it necessarily coming from the religious side. It's actually more of the secular side that actually is covering this stuff up. The problem is the religious side doesn't want to talk about it because they don't want to look crazy, because everyone has this weird secular perspective, and it's like that's really the cover up. They're the ones who are making it uncomfortable, because you don't have to go back more than 120 years. People talked about giants. People talked about the supernatural. They talked about the fae in the religious context. Half of these stories, from the other crowd, are religious in nature, or they're being conveyed by religious authorities. People did used to talk about this. It was, again, sort of this mainstream Rockefeller viewpoint that got, so that we would go into we could go into the factories and do our 8, work our 8 to 5, work our 40 weeks and produce the things. What was it Carlin said? They want you smart enough to push the buttons and pay the taxes. They don't want you contemplating anything else.
No, I agree. Well, great perspective you've shared there, and I appreciate you being on the show this morning, Jason. We will be tuning in to Mysterious Libraries this week. I'm interested in seeing that show, and you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate being on. Appreciate you bringing me on.
Thanks.
Howdy.
And that concludes our Monday show. I will jump right into the outro and let you guys know. We'll be tonight on Pine Island Research. Brown Dwarf's coming on to share some experiences in his research of Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest. Probably have some pictures and whatnot to share. It'll be a fun show. And that'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern here on Untold. But you guys have a great rest of your day, and we will see you later.